So today we're going to talk about databases in the cloud and data sources in the cloud and data stores in the cloud. So a lot of jobs right now are looking for experience and knowledge about data in the cloud, and they can ask for specific technologies, but what they really want is someone who knows the overview and the architecture that is typical in the cloud for data work. So the main things you need to know, I'm going to cover here. So for example, in most cases in the cloud, you're going to be talking about big data. So what is big data? Big data is either big volume of data, big variety of data, so lots of different types of data, structured data, unstructured data in different shapes and so on. And big volume, I said big volume, big variety, and big volatility of data. So big volatility of data means that data might change often, might come in fast, it might be velocity of data, it might be speed of data, that kind of thing. So big data projects aim to help reduce the problems of big data, okay? So the big problems with big data are storing huge amounts of data for a start, and then using that data to make meaningful decisions and to see meaningful charts and graphs and reports and so on like that, to make decisions based upon. So that they're the kind of problems of big data. So how do we fix that? So typically what happens in a big data project is data is going to come in fast or in high volumes at the left-hand side of a picture, and we're going to have to move it through different statuses to make it make more sense. So for example, you might want to move it from one data lake to another data lake because it's changed status. So what does change status mean? So change status might mean from raw to clean. So raw data comes in exactly as it is, and then you clean it up in the first stage typically. And the first stage might be things like removing nulls, or removing data that just doesn't make any sense, or removing data that doesn't have relationships to other data that it should have, that kind of thing. So that might be the first stage of cleaning up your data. So raw data comes in on the left-hand side, and then it's cleaned up on the next stage. So you'll have two data lakes typically, a raw data lake and a clean data lake. Some people call it a trusted data lake. And sometimes there are more stages involved in that. And sometimes you have what's called ETL. You might have heard of ETL. So that's extract, transform, and load. So what that really means is the data is extracted on the left-hand side from wherever the source is. And we'll talk about sources in a minute. And then the data is transformed. So the data might be transformed by removing nulls, removing data that doesn't exist or doesn't make sense, that doesn't have relationships, that kind of thing. So that's one kind of transform. Another kind of transform might mean adding two pieces of data together to make a more important piece of data that makes more sense, that kind of thing. And it also might be making a view out of the data so that two pieces of the data can be seen together, or three pieces or many pieces of the data can be seen together to make an important decision or an important graph or chart, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stages that data can go through before it kind of is meaningful data that you can make a meaningful decision based upon. So on the right hand of this picture, right hand side of this picture, you'd normally have a data warehouse, which takes basically the cleaned up data from the pipeline that we've just talked about, that's going from one data lake to another and cleaning up the data. So that's usually called a data pipeline. And then the output from the data pipeline ends up going into the data warehouse typically. This is just a typical, but it's a very common scenario. Now once the data's in the data warehouse, data warehouses have a lot of features. They have a lot of data governance. They have a lot of what we call ACID properties. So ACID is atomic and consistent, and isolated and durable. So what that really means is the data exists, it's the whole data and not just part of the data, and nothing but the data. So typically that means that the data can be relied upon as part of a business transaction. So data warehouses have that feature that also exists in SQL databases, normal SQL databases, which basically makes the data valid and reliable. And any relationships are valid and reliable also. So that's what a data warehouse does. And it takes in the output from these data pipelines, from these data lakes, and makes use of that data to perform queries or to make charts and graphs and so on. Usually you'll have tools that use the data warehouse, things like Power BI or Tableau, those kind of things. That Qlik is another one, that basically take the data from what's in the data warehouse and make pretty pictures that make sense to a salesperson or a marketing person or what have you, that show that the sales, for example, would be a metric, and the dimension might be over time, like over the last year, how have the sales been, and then another metric might be by store or by part. Sorry, that's a dimension. So the metrics are actual metrics, actual measures, actual values, and then the dimensions are over time or over geography or over some other dimension. So, you know, if you think of like something that's in 3D, think of your data in 3D, what would those dimensions be? And like where I recently worked, it would be by location, by store, or by region, or by distribution center, or that kind of thing. And over time it would be, you know, over the last year or over the last 5 years or over the last month, that kind of thing. And the metrics would be things like sales or profits or that kind of thing. Okay, so that's really what you're trying to do with big data. You're trying to take raw data in on the left hand side, and that might be literally orders for your products. Okay, and then you're going to clean that data up across a data pipeline. A data pipeline might have 3 parts, like extract, transform and load, or it might have 5 or 6 parts in a complicated data situation. And that cleanup process, that data pipeline, gets the data ready to go in the data warehouse and then to be used by the analytics tools, the Power BIs, the Tableaus, the Qliks, that kind of thing. And the important thing to know as well about big data is that there's a new architecture that's really gaining a lot of traction, and it's called the data lakehouse. And it's really having a data warehouse be the governance over your data in your data lakes. So it just puts a little bit more of that acid stuff on top of your data within your data lakes, and that's called a data lakehouse. So this has been all about data in the cloud, and I hope you've enjoyed this little tidbit, cloud bit, and we'll talk later about some more stuff in the cloud.